It is the first time we are using this venue, and it is quite exciting, actually. I feel like the future is on our fingertips. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the first of our Takhayyul, Nativity and Emergent Issues podcast series, organized by the members of the ERC project named Takhayyul at the UCL's Institute for Global Prosperity, the IGP. I am Sertaç Sehlikoğlu, the primary investigator of this 5-year project. The need to this podcast series emerged due to a number of reasons. Firstly, the members of this team, as many of you may already be familiar, are often native scholars who have expertise about the very geographies they have grown up in. The project is carried in 11 different countries in Eastern Europe, Middle East, and South Asia, often referred to as the Global South. That being said, those very contexts are more vulnerable to global changes and global challenges, I think my mind was meant to say, and crisis, as we have seen in, for instance, the flood catastrophe in Pakistan, a result of the global warming, on top of a number of other issues. Thus, the members of this team has suggested to create a platform where we can address the emergent issues as they happen with other scholars, intellectuals, and activists. And today we have Dr. Fatema Sadeghi and Dr. Sumrin Kalia from the Takhayyul Project, Dr. Huan He from the Institute for Global Prosperity, Dr. Ala Shehabi, a UCL scholar and also a former member of the IGP, Rümeysa Çamdereli, a Muslim feminist intellectual and activist. And we also have an anonymous scholar and activist from India. We are quite excited about today. We also have 2 assistants who have been tremendously helpful in setting up this entire platform and the YouTube channel where you might be following us from at the moment. Hazal Aydın from Koç University and Meryem Zishan Köker. So we are, yes, as I said, we're quite excited about today and about starting to connect with you in this new platform, StreamYard. The recording is broadcasted live on YouTube. It will then be edited into a podcast. We are having conversations with our guests, whether to keep it on the YouTube channel as a recording. Our topic is the uprisings in Iran and how it's received in different parts of the world. We have guests to provide insights onto it, on the topic, from China, Pakistan, India, Bahrain, Turkey, and the UK. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to Dr. Fatema Sadeghi. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sertaç, for the introduction and for organizing this event. I'm going to share my screen if I'm allowed to.
Yes,
you
please.
See?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. As you see, the title of this talk is The Power of Ordinary in Creating Extraordinary. Let me begin with this question. Why is this movement significant and what possibilities does it offer? Here, I assume that at least some of you might have followed the news that about this incident that is going on in Iran. So therefore, I will try to answer this question by explaining an aspect that has been almost entirely ignored. My argument is that this movement is strong because it is rooted in ordinary life. It is strong because it is a disruptor of what I call hypermasculinity as an inseparable element of the political apparatus in today Iran. Let me start with a phrase that we hear frequently these days, especially in Western media. I mean, the morality police. Mahsa Amini was arrested and killed by the police while in custody. But the so-called morality police is a misunderstanding of the situation, I think. Because the function of this special unit is to chase and discipline women who are improperly veiled. There is no morality in it. The so-called morality police is notorious. Please note that this is not the first time that a young woman is getting killed while in custody. The morality becomes more questionable if you consider the deceptions and fabrications of the government and security who attempt to conceal the truth about the murder of Mahsa Amini and others by televised confessions, fabricated stories, and so forth. I would use hypersexuality disorder to describe this entire apparatus, including the discourse of hijab in today Iran. By hypersexuality disorder, I mean an excessive preoccupation with sexual fantasies that is difficult to control but causes distress with negative impacts on life and heterosocial relationships. Let me give you an example. One of them is actually the equation of unveiling and nakedness, right after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, in which women participated massively. Ayatollah Khomeini declared that naked women should not appear in public. The equation of nakedness and unveiling has been repeatedly expressed ever since. But it is not limited to the relationship between the government and women. The current leadership and officials attributed the protests to the enemy, namely Israel and the US, and they describe it by using a certain set of words that are replicated from one context to the other. Delusion, deception, Western influence, penetration, and of course, nakedness. Ordinary Iranians are depicted as passive female objects who could easily be deceived by the West. They are perceived as not being capable of deciding for themselves. The irony is that the more people shout on the streets, the more their agency and creativity are negated. Here I am going to show you some slides about this equation of nakedness and the compulsory and the protest against the compulsory hijab. Here in this picture, you see one of the officials of Az-Zahra University who is telling the students who are protesting inside the university that you just want to get naked. And this is another quotation by Hamid Rasai, former deputy of the Iranian parliament, who said, their desire, meaning the protesters' desire, is to graze like an animal and have sex with different person every night. And of course, there are so many answers to this. By veiled women. For instance, here you see that Katarina Gorroch, in response to Rasai, said, Rasai made a mistake by slandering Iranian women. Did you think that everyone is like you, who thinks about sexual issues from morning till night? If it wasn't like that, you wouldn't have said such nonsense. We women will not stop fighting until we silence people like you. And another Twitter account called Kim Soo says, this is what freedom means, not your empty thoughts. This account is actually referring to the voluntarily veiling and also unveiling of these women together. The discourse of the equation of discourse of nakedness is also deeply masculinist. Apart from language of mindset of the authorities, it is also expressed and produced in public ceremonies, documents, films, posters, monuments, and even architectural works. Hypermasculinity is best exemplified in the figure of Qasem Soleimani, the commander-in-chief of the Quds branch of the Iranian Guardian Corps. He was killed by the Americans in 2019, mainly Trump administration actually. Soleimani represents the ideal manhood and the imagined super virility of the Islamic Republic. He is entitled as the man of the field, or Mard Maidan, as the Iranian officials repeatedly call him. After his death, his monuments have been constructed and erected all over the country. Despite these desperate efforts, younger generations in Iran do not feel much identification with this personality. The reason is because the ideal manhood is fabricated and has little to do with the harsh realities of millions of men and women. This hyper-masculine language is also deeply rooted in the ways in which the Iranian police behave with the protesters. While beating women and men severely and blaming them for being corrupt, they also use excessive violent and sexist language. However, let me say that Iran is not an exception. Hypermasculinity plays a pivotal role in right-wing populist movements across the world. In these movements, the image of a super-masculine champion is embodied in certain political figures who appear as the savior of the whole nation. It is not only the greatness of the nation that he promised, but also the return of the imagined lost masculinity. This demonstrates how deeply hypermasculinity and right-wing politics are interwoven. To give another example, the war in Ukraine not only demonstrates the imperialist ambitions of the Russian ruler, but also acts as a muscle-building drug. Regaining masculine power and superiority by war appears to be a subconscious motivation. Another example would be the counter-revolution in Egypt that also employed hypersexuality discourse to suppress the protesters in Tahrir Square. Jamie Allinson, the political scientist, demonstrates how the counter-revolution in Egypt won the streets of Cairo and other cities by manipulating the people's minds. Among other things, this has been done by raping women in the streets and creating a sense of potency/impotency and capability/incapability among the protesters. Raping and harassing women resulted in the collective concern of women that streets are unsafe. By using stereotypical notions of femininity and masculinity, the military succeeded in silencing the Egyptian revolution. An extreme act of violence not only targeted women's bodies, but also the stereotypes around female shame and male honor. That's how the counter-revolution succeeded. In all of these cases, the aim is to mobilize the notion through a hyper-masculine discourse. In doing this, equality is easily reconciled, economic and moral corruption is justified, and dignified life, rights, and freedom is negated. But let me go back to the question that I started this talk. Why is this movement in Iran centered around the slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom is important"? I think it is significant because it disrupts the hypermasculinity discourse of the regime and shows that the government is morally corrupt. This movement emerges from ordinary realities on the ground rather than the illusory world of the authorities. In early 2018, Vida Mowahed, as you see in the picture, dressed in sporty clothing, climbed up to a platform on Enqilab or Revolution Street in the center of Tehran, removed her headscarf and waved it in the air to demonstrate her opposition to compulsory hijab. This highly civil and creative disobedience was followed by other women, and the movement quickly became known as the Girls of the Revolution Street, or دختران خیابان انقلاب. The Girls of the Revolution Street posed a deep fracture within a hypersexual and hypermasculine discourse of the Islamic Republic. In the picture, you show that Vida Mowahed, on the left side of the picture, standing on the platform and waving her scarf, is this is really, that was really, although very civil disobedience, but it was disrupting the hegemonic ordinary, because what Vida Mowahed is doing here is to put herself in the as part of the ordinary life in the Revolution Street, in Engelab Street in part of Tehran. And on the right side of the picture, you see Narges Hosseini, who actually followed. And then I have to say, and the recent that she was arrested in the recent protests. So in doing this, they actually put themselves in a part of ordinary life. But this is not a significant act because it's also disrupt the hegemony of ordinary. This recent movement is strong. I mean, not the girls of the Revolution Street, but the recent movement in Iran is strong because it is rooted in ordinary life, similar to the girls of the Revolution Street, and takes its strength and energy from ordinariness. Thousands of ordinary women and men took to the streets of Tehran and many other cities because they are frustrated by the humiliating, hypermasculine, and hypersexual oppression. This is, in fact, this ordinariness that creates the extraordinary. This ordinariness is exemplified in various slogans, songs, tweets, artistic words, and photos. And I'm going to show you one of the pictures that became quite public these days. This is a picture by a film industry worker, Dina Rad. She actually circulated in her Twitter account. And in this tweet, she says, "We went between work to Javadieh, had breakfast, and returned." So this is actually, this picture shows a coffee house or qahwekhane. One of the in south part of, in a neighborhood in the south part of Tehran, which is called Javadieh. I have to say that Javadieh is actually a working class neighborhood. Those who are familiar with the atmosphere of the Middle East and Iran know that working class neighborhoods are not that much women friendly, especially in a coffee house that are mainly houses that are mainly male dominated. But here you see that these two young women went to that coffee house, and then you also see in this picture that the gentlemen in the picture are actually busy with their own works. There is no sign of sarcastic remarks. There is no sign of staring at them. One of them is on his phone. The other is drinking his tea. And we also see in the mirror a picture of another gentleman who might be the owner or another customer, but we've seen him from his back. But he is also busy with his own stuff. So I think that this is the normalcy. This is the ordinary thing that is very important here. This is an ordinary that creates an extraordinary. And they also eat breakfast as if another era has begun. This is another era. This is another atmosphere. So that is very, I think this is significant actually. In the face of hegemony, so many women insist on ordinary life, eating breakfast in a coffee house in downtown Tehran, dancing, walking, singing, painting, poetry, love, and sport. Here you see another picture of two young women walking on the one of the neighborhoods in downtown Tehran called Kuche Marvi, which is very traditional. So again, here you see that how they disrupt the whole hegemonic atmosphere. And this is another picture which is also very interesting for me because it shows a man writing on the wall, "If you are a man, be a woman, #freedom." So I have to say that, in fact, the enemy that the authorities talk about is life itself. The Islamic Republic declared a war with life by ignoring the everyday life and its hardship, including corruption, precarity, environmental crisis, and severe discrimination and inequality. But precisely because of this, it is doomed to failure. I think here rests the power and popularity of the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom." It also explains the popularity of the song Baraye, or for/because of, by Shervin Hajipur. I have to say that the singer, this is a picture of Shervin Hajipur, who was arrested only because of singing the song. But a few days ago, he was released on bail. The song, its quick popularity, and the arrest of the singer all demonstrate the power of the ordinary in disrupting the hegemonic rule. All that I try to say here is concentrated in this popular song. Therefore, I am going to end this talk by playing this song for you. And you will notice that while he sings, the tweets of the protesters superimpose over his image. And I also have to mention that the translation of the lyrics is from Susanna Olszewska. So I hope you enjoy it.
برای توی کوچه رقصیدن، برای ترسیدن به وقت بوسیدن، برای خواهرم، خواهرت، خواهرامون، برای تغییر مغزها که پوسیدن، برای شرمندگی، برای بیپولی، برای حسرت یک زندگی معمولی، برای کودک زباله‌گرد و آرزوهاش، برای این اقتصاد دستوری، برای این هوای آلوده، برای ولیعصر و درختای فرسوده، برای پیروز و احتمال انقراضش، برای سگهای بیگناه ممنوعه، برای گریه های بیوقفه، برای تصویر تکرار این لحظه، برای چهره ای که میخنده، برای دانش آموزا، برای آینده، برای این بهشت اجباری، برای نخبه های زندانی، برای کودکان افغانی، برای این همه برای غیر تکراری، برای این همه شعارهای تو خالی، برای آوار خونه های پوچالی، برای احساس آرامش، برای خورشید پس از شبای طولانی، برای قرصای اعصاب و بیخوابی، برای مرد میهن آبادی، برای دختری که آرزو داشت پسر بود، برای زن زندگی آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fatima. I think everybody is kind of preparing their comments and questions for you. But if it's okay for everyone, we will continue with the kind of roundtable conversation and then open up the floor for a kind of broader interaction. So our next speaker is Dr. Sumrin Kalia. Sumrin?
Hi, thank you very much. Am I audible? Okay, yeah. This Iran protest has kind of sent waves across the Muslim world, and the women across the Muslim world are actually, having different kind of mixed reactions. And I would like to kind of bring to light a few kind of observations that I've had from Pakistan. And interestingly, as always, we've seen that Pakistan's context is rather different. In the case of Iran, it's usually the morality comes from above. In the case of Pakistan, morality comes from below. And it's usually the women who get prosecuted by their husbands, by their fathers, by their brothers. And it's within the homes that this prosecution goes on. And at this point, I was reminded of the case of Noor Muqaddam last year. She was brutally murdered. Her head was literally chopped off by her own husband. She was not exactly a husband. She was at a friend's place. And she actually, can be considered a high-profile murder because she was the daughter of the ambassador of Pakistan. And as yet, her murderer has not been put to trial in a proper way, and the trial has gone on, and he has been able to evade proper prosecution since entire year has passed. And during this time, many other cases have come up when women have been raped and killed and murdered by mostly their own family members under the pretext of honor killing. And what this makes me think is this hegemony that Fatma was talking about. It does not necessarily need the violence of the state sometimes, or the monopoly of the violence that the state requires. It's a violence that somehow permeates the society. And then who do you hold responsible? I mean, when you do a protest, if there is a state, it is like a civil disobedience. And how does a woman raise a voice against her own family when she's made to suffer these kind of injustice and oppression from the very hands of their own family? And that's where I feel like the question of hegemony becomes a little bit more complicated, as to you don't have the right person to argue with. And then I bring in the question of the women themselves committing violence against other women and acting as the morality police, the right-wing populist women of different Islamist political parties. I mean, the kind of masculinities that they demonstrate, that is also a kind of question that, is somehow difficult to address. Who do we then, go and talk to these kind of oppressions about? So I believe when at this juncture, when these women from Iran are actually able to raise their voice, we need to perhaps ask these questions as to how do we confront these hegemonic orders that have permeated not just the state and politicized the state and made religion a tool of oppression, but also the society and the family as a way of exercising patriarchal control. That's all from my.
Thank you very much. This is very thought-provoking. I was just tweeting your question, actually, which has delayed my unmuting myself process. So now we are turning to Dr. Huan He.
Because I also have a few slides, so let me share it with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my part, I think I'm mainly talking about the China's influence of this Iran uprising in China from a media and social media perspective. That is why I've collected some screenshots of how the state media, the commercialized media, they represent like two kinds of institutional media, how they reported it, and also some social media and how ordinary people reacted to it. So first of all, the state media. This is a screenshot of when I searched the website of Xinhua News, which is the Chinese, the most authoritative Chinese state news on their report, because starting from the 15th of September until now, because I think this is where the incidents that happened and when the movement started to gain power on the ground. So as you can see from this, it's not a literary translation of the titles, but as you can see from the keywords that popped up, the social movement in Iran has never been mentioned even once in the Chinese version of the state media. So from in the past over 20 days, I think most of the focus is still on the nuclear power, for example, the deputy foreign minister's visit, and even the earthquake. And very funny here, as you can see on the right, They even mentioned the World Wrestling Championship, and the very famous Iranian athlete missed the bronze medal. That even caught attention of Chinese state media, but however, what is going on the ground was never properly reported in the Chinese version of the state media. And then we can have an English kind of a version of the media, because they do report in different languages. And it's a pity that I don't understand Arabic, so I can only use English as a kind of a comparison. So in the English website, Iran appear more frequently than on the Chinese website, at least the database. And the news headlines that has stars are the ones where the social movements or protests has been mentioned. But however, I think this really coincides with what Fatima said earlier. Whenever such incidents are reported, they are reported from an Iranian state perspective. For example, 2 French nationals was detained or confessed to inciting protest. And also it says here, it's a kind of the West is using human rights as a tool to oppress others, for example, the Iranian people. Also here, Iran is accusing the Europe of holding double standard. And also Iran slams hypocrisy of the so-called sympathizers of the Iranian people. And I think we probably all become the representative of that group that they criticize. So this is the reporting, I think, in more recent time. But going back, so starting from the early mid-September, you can see that this protest has never been mentioned once in the first 10 days of this movement by the state media, even in the English version. But I'm not saying because of the time limit, I didn't really have the capacity to look into all state media, because they have, like, say, websites, they have newspaper, also printed newspapers, and there is also state, for example, TV programs. This is not give you a very comprehensive understanding of how it is reported, but I think it is representative enough of many of the focus and that how the Chinese state is reporting it, and that will have influence on how the Chinese people are perceiving it, because the context in China is that the media is heavily controlled by the state. So, and even if the local media, they usually have to follow the reporting policies set by the state. So that is one side of the story. And then there are very few liberal-leaning or marketized, so there was a typo here, marketized media. For example, Caixin is one of them. And since in the past 20 days, they have written 6 reports on it in a more relatively subjective way. It is also one of the most trustworthy, in my personal opinion, media in domestic China, especially the mainland right now. And this also shows the limited reporting space for institutionalized media in China. So the next slide is my summary of the Chinese social media sentiments. And first of all, social media, as in the West, I guess, most of the time, the information there is really scattered because institutional media is heavily censored. So on social media, people are relying on individual bloggers and the social media to provide updates. But these, very short-lived social media posts, they usually only attract very short-lived attention, and it's usually focused on very extreme cases. So it's not really a continuous reporting on the development of the story. No, there is no such a kind of a reporting or information kind of a channel for people to get a kind of a follow-up understanding like that. And also there is also a huge digital gap among different people, social groups. For example, social media is more widely used by the teens up to people say of 40 years old. My parents' generation, they don't use social media that often. And also it is also heavily used by urban population who are well educated. So the rural population and those who didn't receive really very good education, they become underrepresented in the social media. And then secondly, I think in general, there is insufficient understanding about Iran in China, whether you consider Iran as a kind of a geographic area or as a country or the religion it represents or the culture behind it, there is insufficient understanding in general, even among academics. And also, but very interestingly, I think I had a casual discussion with Fatima when we met in the office. People are making a lot of comparisons when they see instances like this. For example, they were surprised because, for example, a lot of these international platforms, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Western media, BBC, CNN, The Guardian, they are all blocked in China. So Chinese people were surprised when they knew that, oh, because of these protests, WhatsApp and Instagram are now blocked in Iran. But that was never ever for many years, it was not even accessible for ordinary Chinese. So people realized, oh, probably there's even more control in China than in Iran. And also there are also, especially the liberals, I think, but I've also seen like friends asking why is the protest happening in Iran and why the Chinese are not brave enough to organize something like this, and why are we still suffering quietly? I think people have a lot of unexpressed opinions, especially during the COVID. As you know, China still is under this zero COVID policy. People's everyday life is still heavily restricted. So when Fatimans talk about ordinary life, I don't think the people who are living in China at present is able to have an ordinary life because of this COVID policy. And also, people make comparison about internal politics. So if, say, these Iranian women, they are asking for a kind of say they want the choice not to wear the hijab. In comparison, if, say, the Chinese government want to liberalize the domestic Muslim groups, for example, in Xinjiang, would that be legitimized as a comparison? So there are some discussion on this aspect as well. There are also collective memories of past incidences. Especially, I want to draw your attention to this screenshot, because this is a social media post that's posted by some individual blogger to talk about how an Iranian girl, only 20 years old, who was shot by the police to death during the protest. And when I was trying to repost it, I received this information. As you can see, sorry, there's a violation of relevant laws and the regulations or the Weibo Community Convention, and the current operation is not possible. So you cannot repost such information, even there are individual bloggers who try to feed the information into the social media platform. Also, people have this discussion about the strong state and the weak state. In this case, whether it is because Iran has a relatively weak state that there are still some space for civil society activities or social movements like this. But that said, there are also people who has also shown solidarities, because people are saying that we feel you to the Iranian people, although probably they wouldn't be able to hear their support right now. And this support usually comes from feminists, liberals, and non-statist leftists in China. Because among women, I think there is also this shared experience of controlling and policing women, and the women also suffer the most and become the bravest. I think this is true in Iran and also become true in China. Because if you look at a social movement, there is no really social movement of any large scale in China in the past, say, let's say, at least 10 years. But the Me Too movement has been still going on since 2018 and quietly for 4 years. And the women, a lot of women, ordinary women, are talking about their experience of being harassed, being aggressed, being censored, being abused, which I think shares a lot of similarities, but in a different form. Also, when we get news about the Iranian, what is going on in Iran, we see this very similar blockchain-style self-organization. The protests and movements are bottom up. It's not really led by any political organizations or any political party. It is heavily relied upon social media, and most of the people who are in the movement are the young generation. And as a result, as the movement is gaining popularity and support, the wider society started to join them as well. So this is also, I think, a similar pattern that we can see from China. I think that's my part for now, and we can have more discussion in the Q&A session. Okay.
Yes, I can almost feel the questions piling up. So I would appreciate if the audience can write down their questions for their turn. You can also use the comment section. Apparently, everybody is able to follow the comments, which is great. And without further ado, may I turn to Rumeysa Çandereli?
Yeah, of course. Hi. It is great to hear all the contexts and differences, and also the commonalities between all our experiences. As a veiled woman that is not accepted to be veiled so much in Turkey as well, it was an interesting period of time that I've been actually trying to understand more about the Iranian situation. And but through that, first I want to say that I'm a Muslim feminist activist in Turkey, and hijab ban has been one of the most important issues that I've struggled against through my through being a child. Actually, I was starting veiling in when I was 12, and I'm 34. So it's been so a long time that I've been inside these issue as a subject. So the ban itself in Turkey makes it harder to discuss all these issues, because my connection with the veil itself has been because of this ban mainly these days, actually. So if it wasn't the ban, I don't know what kind of a connection I would have with my veil. So the issues in Iran we try to discuss as both the ban itself and both the obligation of wearing a hijab is the same thing. That's mainly around the manhood and around patriarchy, talking about women. So that's the thing that we are trying to discuss in Turkey. But interestingly, the issue has been came to the agenda of the political parties in a different way. So the opposition's leader has had a interesting comment on their future approach around the ban itself, that they will provide a law that will make it impossible for the ban to come here in Turkey again. So the opposition itself has been symbolized as a Kemalist, and also one of the symbols of the ban itself for some time now for the Turkish history. And so this kind of a change has been an interesting change that I was actually shocked, but seemed to or felt to have it as a positive improvement. But on the other hand, the opposition itself has been, not in the same page, because they, some of the political parties, leftist parties, said that this CHP, the leader of the opposition, is trying to be a right-wing political party by saying this. So it's not the time to say this, etc. So we're after 10 years of the ban is over, and after all those years of discussions around hijab, now discussing all the issue again from the start, actually. So we are trying to understand more about the agencies of hijabi women in Turkey, etc., or the other way around, and the political pressure of the conservative side of the story through religion is getting more and more increased. So it's like getting complex in Turkey, and I hope that the resistance in Iran will also reflect to our resistance in Turkey as a solidarity, because we need so much of a struggle together as the world's women's movements. And also I can also have a little comment on the identity of cultural identity of the women killed in Iran, and she being a Kurdish woman. And it is an interesting and important discussion as well that we I think skip in all over the world about the issue, where her death was something that's also about her ethnical identity as well. So this discussion could be another comment and another discussion maybe we can have in the Q&A. So that's what I want to say, because the Kurdish issue is something that we all trying to discuss in Turkey, and we're not really able to. So I think it's also has a kind of an division around it, discussion around that could be an important topic for our solidarity as well. So that's from me for now.
Thank you very much. And I'm also very happy that you've raised the identity of Jina Mahsa Amini. I think I'm expecting a number of questions about that. And our next speaker is, how shall I address you? As HS, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
And we would need you to increase the volume, actually, because your voice is coming from a distance, or maybe come closer to the microphone.
Yeah. Is it better now?
Yes, slightly better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to voice my thoughts on what's going on regarding the hijab. And in India, we have a very different context. The previous speaker was talking about a hijab ban in Turkey, and in India also a large number of Muslim women, especially in southern India, where the hijab ban has really erupted as a very contentious issue. The hijab ban has become a very contentious issue in the southern part of India, as I said. So, just to give a little bit of context about how this started, especially this year, in the month of February 2002, a dispute arose in a junior college in a state of southern India, and in that incident, several hijabi Muslims female students were not allowed to enter the college because because they were wearing a hijab, and it supposedly went against the dress code that the college was imposing. So these Muslim female students were not allowed to enter their college. They were disbarred from entering the premises, and some of them were even again not allowed to appear for the exams. So so the matter went to the court, and the High Court of of the Southern Indian state ruled that hijab wearing is not an essential Islamic practice. In other words, the High Court of the state said that the hijab is not an essential part of Islam. It is not an integral part of the Islamic practice of life, of way of life, of everyday living. So when we talk about the state, or when we talk about how mm, masculinity is, how hegemonic masculinity or this kind of dominant masculinity tries to control women, in the case of India, we have to remember that there is this larger context of minority persecution. So the hijab ban can actually be understood in India with along with patriarchal obsession of controlling women's bodies, plus this whole context of minority persecution, which has actually escalated ever since the current government under the Hindu nationalist government has come to power in 2014. So with the ascendance of this Hindu nationalist regime, what we have seen is a systematic and persistent attack against minority communities, be it their way of life, their way of living, who they marry, what they wear, how Muslims divorce, how Muslims eat, what they eat, how they where they go for their studies, what kind of madrasas they go to. Everything is up for questioning again, and the government or the state, the majoritarian religious state or the Hindu nationalist state, in this context, in the Indian context, is actually trying to impose this hijab ban in order to attack or demoralize or demoralize these Muslim women. And the funny part is that in this, all state machineries, be it the executive, the judiciary, the legislature, they all somehow they they come together in a certain way. So much so that in this case, especially in the hijab ban case, the judiciary is actually taking upon itself the role of interpreting Islam, or maybe telling Muslims how they should be living their religious life, or actually interpreting Islam, and telling Muslims whether hijab is an essential part of their day-to-day activities. Or in another case, there was another question that was put forward in front of the court, whether offering namaz in a mosque is an essential part of Islamic life. So what is happening in India, at least with the hijab ban, is not just patriarchy, but also a larger systematic persecution of religious minorities, which only seems to be escalating. So there is this obsession with controlling the bodies of women, of the other community, of the marginalized other, of the complete other, of the otherized community. So there is a complete control of that, along with a complete state backed persecution of religious minorities. So we have to see the hijab ban in the Indian context along with this way. And it's also important to reiterate over here that in India, it's not only Muslim women who cover their heads. There are other communities as well which require women to cover their head in different situations. So the issue of hijab ban becomes even more pernicious, because there are other communities where women are covering their head, they are veiling themselves. So it becomes much more contentious, and there's this whole angle of minority persecution. So that needs to be factored in when we talk about India.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can see the questions are piling up, but that was very important. I just want to kind of abuse my position as a chair and to kind of state how, in the most simplistic terms, patriarchal ideologies are defined as having control over women's bodies. So we have seen the kind of the same type of audacity to deny women's agency and to claim authority and power over women's bodies in the context of just hijab, by compulsory veiling and by bans over veiling, including in France, including in Turkey, including in India. And I'm guessing we will receive more questions from this. And I'm happy that you highlighted this kind of denial of women's relationship with their own religion, and claiming they would be ignorant, as if they don't have any space to establish another connection to the God, and as if they are following some sort of false consciousness. These are all kind of important points, I guess. Now, last but not the least, Ala Shahabi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for all your thoughts and comments so far. And I can only sort of agree and listen carefully to what everyone has said before me, particularly Fatima, who I believe is Iranian and is closely connected and following what's happening. I can just talk from my own positionality as a British Muslim and as a Bahraini citizen. So I'm just going to offer some thoughts from that perspective. Viewing the events in Iran from London, both from the perspective of the British Muslim community, we watched as images of Iranian women protest bravely in the face of police, and it resonates particularly as an Arab to the images we saw in 2011 in the Arab Spring. So we watch with tentative eyes and worry and concern over the potential response, particularly kind of the repression that ordinary Iranians face on the street. And I just want to point to the lovely essay that was translated in Jadaliya recently. Maybe we can share that link, in which it's an essay written by a protester in Iran, and in which they kind of describe the feelings and emotions of being on the street. And there was one line that particularly resonated with me, that was that being on the street suspends all thoughts of death. And in that way, we begin to understand people's relationship to that kind of militarized and securitized confrontation, in which fear no longer exists in the minds of those who take to the streets. I'm now, there's a moment of liberation that people live that they can't forget, and it changes collective consciousness in ways we can only appreciate watching from a distance through the screen. But anyway, and we're seeing kind of, as observers and spectators to this, we can only consume these images and and wish and hope and pray for the safety of activists and the women who are clearly fighting for their rights. Now, from a British Muslim perspective, we British Muslims are diverse, they're varied in their sectarian background, but it's really about the question of the hijab itself as an object and as a symbol. So in that sense, what does the hijab mean? And the fear that the tendency to valorize and obviously where we should rightly support protest movements can be reused to possibly garner the far right and other Islamophobic tendencies that aren't necessarily far right, that are basically mainstream in the West. So without necessarily decentering the role of Iranian women, if the hijab becomes repoliticized in this way through the burning of the hijab and others, how does that feed into Islamophobic agendas? And is that the reason why liberal feminists and others who do within their own movements retain Islamophobic tendencies that are not intersectional in any way, to suppress Muslim women, British in the UK, in France and others? So in that sense, there's a sense of ambivalence towards the response, not towards Iranian women, towards the response of the West to Iranian protests and Iranian activists. And it's worrying, because it should be a way of opening up a conversation, not necessarily comparative one, but about female subjectivity to choose who they want to be and to wear who they want to be. And so, for example, recently French activists, were cutting their hair in solidarity, or Israeli so-called feminists were also standing in solidarity with Iranian women. Now, of course, here they do this while repressing Muslim women or Palestinian women. So the question is, there is, what is this duplicity, and how do we address this? How do we, maybe it is not the job of Iranian women, but how do we address the duplicity in ways that calls out the repression from within these countries themselves, Western countries themselves? So this is just kind of being mindful of Gayatri Spivak's notion that white people really want to save brown women from brown men. Really, not really. It's if it's about Palestinian women, they're not interested. If it's about women's rights and Muslim rights in France, they're not interested. If it's about Saudi Arabian women wanting to drive, they're not interested. If it's about the arrest of the ending of the apartheid state in Palestine, they're not interested. So it's just kind of questions around British Muslims' concern is around that duplicity. Similarly, within the Gulf, because the kind of this anti-Iranianism that we generally see from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf, from the UK and others, this feeds into, the circulation of images feeds into that kind of agenda. So it brings up the kind of the fears and concerns. Are women's rights yet again being used as a fig leaf for a kind of neo-imperialist agenda that wants to continue repressing Iran as a whole through sanctions, through possibly military intervention? And how the question for us is, can we as movements calling for women's rights do something that doesn't get us embroiled in these geopolitical calculations? And is that too much to ask from simple, ordinary people who want to ask basic rights? I say that with tentative hooks because, we saw in the 2011 Arab Spring how the geopolitics then overcame these movements. I don't know if this is the right moment to do that or not, but this is just the kind of a cautionary tale from what we've seen happen elsewhere in Syria and in Afghanistan, even, where some of these things do not fall in with the geopolitical calculations that sometimes sabotage, and whilst they celebrate them, they can also destroy them at the same time, movements at the same time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. These questions are piling up. So this says, as the chair, I am realizing that I'm facing a very difficult task right now, not only because this needed to be perhaps multiple sessions, like not one single event, but also there are a number of questions raised by the guests in the studio and by the audience in the YouTube chat box. So here's what I'm suggesting. I'm opening up the floor to respond the questions raised amongst the guests here and since we started. But meanwhile, please do feel free to address some of the questions appearing in the chat box, because as I've been following the questions, because apparently as the administrator, I was supposed to release the questions being asked in the chat box. Some of them are very broad. Some of the questions are kind of very existential questions, very hard to respond, but some of them are easier to respond. So what I'm suggesting is, while I'm opening the floor to conversation, I also encourage the members of this conversation, this discussion, to respond to some of the questions that you might find easy to write in the chat box. Okay, so floor is yours. Who would like to go next? I'm guessing I should turn to Fatima because there were a number of questions being asked. Fatima, would you like to go ahead? And then Huan, it seems like you will be next because I'm seeing a number of questions about China specifically.
Okay, shall I read the chat box?
You can also address some of the questions raised by the panel members, actually, and like there were a couple of points raised about the Kurdishness of the movement, not only about the identity of the victim, but also where the kind of uprising has started from the Kurdish regions, and also Jinjay and Azadi, in fact, is kind of one of the essential slogans of the Kurdish movement, crafted like individually by Abdullah Öcalan himself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you might want to start with that because I feel like it's one of the repeating important points.
So I think that that's a very good question actually, because although Mahsa Amini was a Kurdish woman who, lived in the small town of Saqqez in Iranian Kurdistan, but this Kurdishness is not much, I think, within this movement. Actually, there are two things that I have to explain. One is this Kurdishness, and one it's the relationship of this Kurdishness with the whole movement. So this Kurdishness is actually very important, and so many Iranians, even Baluchs, Arabs, Azeri, and even in central parts of Iran, express their sympathy because Kurdistan has been one of the regions that have been severely oppressed, not only after but also before the revolution. So it is a marginalized province. It is, and so many people are actually struggling with poverty and precarity and severe economic and environmental hardships. So this is so because Mahsa was Kurdish, this added to the anger of the people who are familiar with the level of oppression, with the problems of Kurdistan. But here that was, very interesting incident happened. Although that was, this Kurdish identity and the Kurdishness was raised, but at the same time, it actually helped the solidarity of the nation. So many Iranians from different parts of Iran as I said, expressed their sympathy, and it added to like the solidarity of a national solidarity. I think that was very interesting.
So it
And
hasn't been sidelined as a minority issue. That's important. That's the importance you are highlighting.
That was, exactly. So that is one of the things that, I actually, so many people are aware and are still worried, about, this identity and the potential dangers for division of the, collapse, internal collapse and division and so on. But I think Allah raised a very important and interesting notion that once you are on the streets, another future, even another future is possible, and even you start thinking about your presence differently, and that is the interesting issue of that. So yes, that was a question of Kurdishness, but that question of Kurdishness was put in the broader context of the sufferings of the nation, being whether they are Kurdish, whether they are Baluchs, or whether they are Arabs, and so on. So, and I have to say that the news of Zahedan, another, very deeply actually impoverished province in Iran, neighboring Pakistan, the news of the coming of the Zahedan, I mean, that was the news was that there's so many protesters wanted to make protests on the streets of Zahedan in protest against the reportedly rape and killing of a young woman by the head of the military and police of Zahedan. So the news came up and the people took to the street. But before that, they were shot and so many of them were dead by the police. So this news was added to the news of Mahsa and so on. So suddenly you see that the whole nation is grieving because of because of being Iranian in front of a regime that is oppressive, whether you're you're Kurds, whether you're Arabs, whether you're Baluchs, or whether you're from women or men, or whether you are from upper or middle class or working class. So that was actually a sense of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to go next, or is there any other question you'd like to address next before we move on, Fatima?
There was another question, but maybe in the next round, if some other people, especially you and Sumrin, wanted to answer. Thank you.
Okay. Huan, I can see there are a number of questions regarding your contribution, and I can see how welcomed and found to be much needed. So is it okay if I let you pick the question you'd like to address?
Yeah, I think many of these questions are actually related, and they are also related to the, social media reactions that I've shared earlier, but probably requires further discussion. So I think as we discuss, we have received one comment who says that while I'm texting, they have blocked the building next to us, and more fences has been brought back tonight under the zero COVID policy. And it feels like the worst nightmare, but thank you for seeing this. And also, I think another question related to this is like, do you think Chinese are indifferent to hegemony, or is it just based on our instincts? So I think I know what this audience is asking, and I think there are lots of discussions about why the Chinese have quietly suffered so much, but then no large-scale social movement was ever slightly possible, or it might actually. There are a lot of like small-scale social movements happening in China every year. If you look at some databases, because there are civil society groups who are documenting this, but most of the time when they happen, they will crack down before people, like even in the same city, can get to know about these instances. So there is a highly controlled in terms of information, and people don't know even say their close neighborhoods. So on the one hand, I don't really think that the Chinese are so different from other people in terms of they are willing to suffer more. And I also don't agree when say some people say that the Chinese are not brave, because Chinese, the identity itself is such a complex term. For example, for example, the feminist movement has been going on very, very quietly, although under very tight censorship for 4 years, and it's still going on. So I don't think it does justice to the feminists when you say that the Chinese women are not brave enough. And also there are other minority groups in China who has tried to fight, but unsuccessfully, I guess. Look at what's happening in Hong Kong, look at what's happening in Xinjiang. I think it's also unfair to say that they are not brave enough. I think they are very, very brave, but then what you are, but the counter force is also very, very strong. So so I think there is one question that asks, is there a safe and effective way of resistance? Going back to the point of ordinariness, I think the resistance also, I think, comes from everyday life. And there are many, many different ways of resistance. It doesn't need to be on the street. That's one way of resistance, very open resistance. Talking about it openly is a kind of resistance. There are also more subtle ways of resistance. And I think the young generation is already realizing this. For example, if you look at the fertility rate in China, it's very low because young people are not cooperating. And I see many young generation commenting on social media saying that if we can't live a happy life in contemporary China, why do we bring a new kid to the society to experience the same thing? So I think that is also a kind of resistance in a very subtle way, and also it's reflected in your everyday life. So I think resistance comes in multiple ways, and I wouldn't encourage young people to become martyrs. I think you need to learn to be smart and resist in the affordable way, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Xuan. There are a number of questions immediately addressing Fatima, but there is one question which opens up the conversation a little bit further. So I'm going to kind of bring this one forward. This one is by Yasmin Huang, who says, I'm also very curious about this intersectionality in the uprising. Could you please share more about this in the context of Iran and Turkey? And if I may, I would be also interested in bringing more like Pakistan and India as well, actually. So just kind of further to think about the intersectionality aspect. How are people seeing themselves, relating themselves to the movement emotionally, intellectually? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's okay. Am I? So
we are playing with the technicality. For some reason, the StreamYard is supposed to bring you forward, but it's insisting on Rumeysa. We don't understand that. You can go ahead. We can hear you well.
Okay. So thank you. Yeah, that's a very important question. Actually, part of the answer I already said in a previous question, that the identity here plays a role. For instance, Kurdishness plays a major role here. But I mean, this is the intersectionality. Mahsa Amini was a woman who was arrested and murdered by the police, but who was also she was also a Kurdish woman. And that's an intersection that appears here. So there is this kind of intersectionality, and you can see it in different versions, such as those women who are in Zahedan now, in Baluchistan, Iranian Baluchistan, actually. And this is another intersectionality. Although they are Iranian, but they are also this. They are women, and they are also Baluchs. And because of that, the discrimination is actually an added discrimination because of being a provincial woman and also because of women. So in Zahedan, for instance, you have this sort of, because there are also, in Zahedan, we have also a Sunni like element as well. And part of the Sunni, elements we can see also in Kurdistan. So they are women, they are from Kurdistan, and many of them are Sunni. So these are the added sort of intersectionality that we see here. But I can say that, yes, there is the intersectionality, which is important, but those even who are not Kurdish, they are not women, and also not Sunni, like the majority of the Fars that are, also originally Shiite, and also men, they also feel solidarity with this movement, because I think what actually links all of them together is this element of humiliation and this deprivation of ordinary life. So I actually, maybe there was some little misunderstanding in what I said, what I was saying about ordinary life as well. I actually saw so many comments that, I mean, as one also said, that there is no ordinary life in China. So I'm actually going to say that exactly the situation in Iran is this, that women try to, to regain the ordinary life by emphasizing that this is important. This is ordinary life that is important. Dancing is important, music important, life itself is important, and that's what they try to, say by this slogan "Zan Zindagi Azadi." So in different contexts, you see that this slogan is sit, but in different contexts, people, feel discrimination in one way or the other, but at the same time, there is this feeling of solidarity because all of them, no matter where and how and when, they actually experience this humiliation, and they want to have life back. So there is this intersectionality element, but apart from that, there are other things as well. So I try to, by concept of ordinary life, I try to actually conceptualize the whole feeling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm guessing Rumeysa and Sumrin and HS would also want to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, of course. From the Turkey side, from my perspective, from my context of being a Muslim feminist and being a part of the feminist movement, I think we have given such a struggle within the feminist struggle itself. I've been an activist for 10 years, more than 10 years now. And for the first years, I actually wasn't accepted to be a feminist at all.
By whom?
By the secular feminists and also by the others as well. So being a Muslim and being a feminist wasn't something that was accepted so much. But feminist movement itself, actually, I think given an important lesson that this kind of intersectionality is possible. But I think it's not about only the secular ones accepting the Muslims, but also the Muslim women trying to be there, trying to be present in the moment itself through its own stories and on its own issues there. Like we have established different platforms, online platforms and association so closely. So I think that's such an effort that needs a mutual contract and mutual, struggle throughout. But as I mentioned, it's to be a mutual one. Of course, I'm talking about my experience about being a Muslim woman, but I don't think we, as feminist movement, we couldn't give out the lesson to be intersectional in terms of having the Syrian or other refugee women involved in the movement, or even the Kurdish women still are not really included to the mainstream parts of the discussion. So I think it's a huge process that we are trying to have this resistance in between us against all the pressure that we are experiencing. Sometimes it becomes something that's not, don't talk these times because we have many issues around us kind of an issue. but I think we're giving a nice effort on that, and there's a huge transformation that I feel experience personally in the Turkish feminist movement.
Thank you very much. May I also add, again, I keep abusing my power as a chair, but I know Rumeysa, from the moment she was dragged into this politics, actually, by a very simple thing, performing something she desires. She's a musician, and she was performing on the stage at her university, which on the next day we've seen her on the newspapers, in one of the secular newspapers, saying both hijabi and playing guitar, as if they have to be mutually exclusive, with that tone in it. So in the kind of polarized context, even the kind of simple steps would like the question was about intersectionality, and I think humans are intersectional anyway. We are kind of multiple. We have multiple desires, multiple subject positionings, etc. And in the kind of polarized context, we are dragged into intersectional politics, is what I wanted to add. Sumrin or HS, would you like to add any notes?
Yeah, I think I would go ahead. I think there are a few things that I have been coming to my mind first regarding this intersectionality question. I mean, the example that I gave from Pakistan, Noor Muqaddam, she comes from the elite group. In fact, even when it comes to Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, she was murdered by Islamists despite being the having the highest, coming from the dynastic politics, as you call it. And so I believe the intersectionality, particularly in terms of class, is important. But when it comes to being a woman, these class dynamics somehow do not matter so much, and the women somehow continue to get prosecuted despite whatever class dynamic they come from. In India, for example, but yes, like in cases like India, if you're from an ethnic minority or from a religious minority, that can be a different thing. But in India as well, when we go and look beyond the religious divide, rape culture is quite a common thing, and women are persecuted left and right, regardless of, yes, it does change the extent of persecution, but we have to remember that women's movements and women's activism, just like the same way women themselves are, disproportionately being subjected to different kinds of oppression, remains a concern without just the intersectionality issue. And that brings me to the point of which Ala raised about the co-option of the women's activist movements that we have seen making it this argument of brown Muslim women needing saving from brown men, kind of becoming a reason for to further certain kinds of geopolitical agendas. That is also another way the women's activisms are persecuted or oppressed on a global scale. I've been trying to keep remembering about this particular statistics that was shared recently about with Pew Research, out of 56 countries, 42 countries, women are harassed for wearing clothes which violate secular norms, for wearing the hijab, whereas in 19 countries, they're harassed for wearing clothes which violate religious norms, or like, for example, for not wearing, for not wearing hijab, or for violating to not disagreeing to wear the hijab. So the problem here is perhaps on a broader scale. When we look at these kind of protests, we need to remember that the injustice is in general against the women, and as more and more we go towards more insecurities and inequalities, the women's body becomes a way of exercising power over it, and then it becomes an expression of showing off the frustrations and that are coming in general. And there I think we need a little bit more debate on what does it mean for women's movement on a global level? And how can we, find solidarity and move away from the question of the Muslim woman or the brown woman, and somehow be able to connect across these kind of divides and actually do something or talk about things that do not make it possible for other powers to co-opt these kinds of movements. And which is why I think India is an example, an important aspect, because it's not just about whether somebody wears a hijab or does not wear a hijab or does not want to wear a hijab. It is definitely about that, but it's more about why do we find it so important, or why do people find it so important to control women's bodies and decide what they want to do with their lives.
Thank you very much. And HS, would you like to add anything, or? I think we are continuing then. There was, I think we have just enough time, 3 minutes to be precise, for one more question. And I think I'm going to look at Sebastian Garnier's question. How strong is the support of this revolt? Does a vast majority of the population wants to fall off the regime? The question is specifically about Iran. I understand that, but I think it also gives us the opportunity to highlight some of the elements about the support to the revolt across the world, perhaps.
Okay, thank you so much.
And if everybody can keep their answers very short so that we won't violate the time.
Yeah, okay. So I'll keep it short. How strong is the support of this revolt? I have to say it is strong, and so many surveys and let's say the scholarships and also numerous qualitative and quantitative data actually predicted that something like this might happen. And what we see on the streets are somehow, although it's completely different and it might have might lead to other directions, but the support of the society for this movement is high. And another sign is that now there are high school children, the high school boys and girls who are chanting on the streets against the regime. So because of that, we are actually, I think that we actually entered a revolutionary situation. I'm not saying that tomorrow there will be another revolution, but I mean, the people's, that there are so many added and accumulation of problems in Iran that the government is not willing and probably is not anymore able to solve. And that leads me to the second part of the question, how strong is the repression? And I think exactly, I mean, because the government is not willing to and is even not able now to solve the problem, and this pervasive sense of unwillingness, everybody knows that, and this is quite surprising even for the authorities who are among the core of the regime. They also started criticizing this way of approaching the protesters, and all the time bringing justifications such as they are influenced by the West, they are the US, they are Israel, which is not true actually. So I think that the level of repression is high because of the regime's inability to respond to the demands of the people. But there are some short-term and also long-term consequences. Just to keep it short, for short-term consequence, I think that the level of oppression of women will be decreased. That does not mean that they will try other ways, like they might abolish all these police on the streets, but they might continue that repression in other ways. But in the long run, I think we are in a situation that some uneven, unimagined consequences might happen. And I think that the inability of the regime is actually pervasive, but we cannot predict the result yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And anybody would like to add? I'm looking at Ala, guessing she might have something to add, but I'm not so sure. Don't want to put on anyone on the spot, which is technically what I'm doing probably with all the technology. You're on mute.
I mean, we look on. We're talking about a state now that experienced a large-scale revolution over 40 years ago, and it needs to reconcile its particular mode of governance around what a theological state can do in today's world order under very strict global sanctions. You know, it's the most isolated country by far that's had the longest running sanctions economically. It's hard to tell how it's managed to sustain theological rule for this long, for over 40 years, without kind of succumbing to, global hegemonic Western culture, for example, media, and how you can kind of sort of insulate society from, global trends and Western liberalism, basically. So reconciling sort of this secular liberalism with a theocracy is something that I think goes much deeper than the question of the headscarf. It goes really to the kind of the purpose and the principles of rule itself. And so, yeah, we wait to see how the Republic either renews itself to deal with that deeper question, or whether it reverts to kind of older forms of just pure, just repression to just kind of kill the debate off. But we know that Iran, this is my impression from the outside, is a very rich, complex country in which there are different political trends within it. There are different political voices within it, whether they're allowed to speak, whether they're allowed to debate this question, whether they're allowed to come up with ways of moving forward to either kind of embody revolutionary fervor on the streets, or whether to open up deeper questions about the future of the country, is something that we all are watching and waiting to see.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we are 4 minutes behind our closure time. So what I'd like to do, first of all, amongst the comments we have been receiving, I'd like to thank everyone. And the last 2 comments were from Mama Pranvera and Yu Fang, very encouraging notes. So I would like to say you've listened to Women, Life, Freedom, Iran Uprising and its International Impact as part of Takhayul, Indigeneity and Emergent Issues podcast series, which means we will be editing this live broadcast into a podcast. And we are hoping to host you in our future events. I'd like to thank each one of our guests very much for their time, for pouring their mind and heart into this conversation. That's very valuable, which is immediately related to the very need we had in putting together a series like this. As scholars from the geographies we are working on, my colleague here, Fatima, in the meeting used the term, we are those who do not just have the return ticket from the geographies that we are focusing on. We are a lot more bounded and rooted, which is shaping up the way we are positioning ourselves very, very deeply, not being dismissive to other scholars, obviously, but it has a significance and we are fully aware of it. And the event series are, of course, hosted by the Institute for Global Prosperity, who they are already hosting our project. And I'd like to thank Zishan Köker and Hazal Aydın as well, who have been instrumental in putting together this series. So So if you can unmute yourself and we can all thank together, perhaps, to the audience who have been following us till this moment. At one point, we had over 100 listeners. We are closing up right now, and we have 60, which is a great number.
And I should thank you, and also Juan and Ala and Sumrin, and your honorable guest from Turkey, which I cannot pronounce.
And we have the HS, our anonymous.
So I realize that there are so many commonalities and shared concern and common concerns among us. So as Sumrin said, I think that we can do something about it, probably. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for everyone who engaged with us too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.